Sometimes the hardest thing about losing someone you love isn't saying goodbye. It's living with all the questions they left behind. For 30 years, Tucker Gage carried the weight of not knowing what really happened to his younger brother. When folks in Cedar Ridge saw the old mountain man pay $200 for a rusted shipping container, they laughed and shook their heads. Tucker didn't care about their opinions. He'd seen those serial numbers before, carved into his memory from a government report that told him nothing but lies. Inside that container, Tucker found his brother's prototype steam wagon and a letter that would change everything he thought he knew. The machine wasn't just an invention. It was proof of a cover-up that went all the way to Washington. What would you do if you discovered the government had been lying about your family for 3 decades? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning mist clung to the Montana peaks like an old man's memories, stubborn, familiar, and reluctant to let go. Tucker Gage stood on his cabin's weathered porch, coffee steaming in his calloused hands, watching the sun paint the wilderness in shades of gold and amber. At 73, he'd learned to appreciate these quiet moments before the world demanded his attention. A soft whine drew his gaze downward. Rex, his 12-year-old German Shepherd mix, lay stretched across the porch planks, grey muzzle resting on massive paws. The dog's once keen eyes had grown cloudy with age, but his ears still perked at every forest sound. Tucker reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a hand-carved wooden whistle, its surface worn smooth from decades of handling. He'd made it himself 40 years ago, back when his hands were steadier and his heart lighter. "Come on, old boy," Tucker said, giving the whistle a gentle blow. The sound was barely audible to human ears, but Rex's tail thumped against the porch boards. "Let's check the snares." The routine never changed. Every morning for the past 15 years, since he'd retreated to this remote corner of the Bitterroot Mountains, Tucker and Rex would walk the perimeter of his 40-acre homestead. They'd check the rabbit snares, inspect the solar panels that powered his modest needs, and tend to the small vegetable garden that kept him fed through the harsh Montana winters. Tucker had built everything himself. The cabin from lodge pole pines he'd felled and milled, the root cellar carved into the hillside, the workshop where he crafted furniture and tools with the same precision he'd once applied to military operations. Self-sufficiency wasn't just a lifestyle choice for Tucker. It was a necessity born from hard-earned distrust. As they walked the familiar trail, Tucker's mind drifted to the dreams that had been visiting him more frequently lately. Dreams of Marcus, his younger brother, bent over blueprints in their father's garage, grease-stained fingers tracing mechanical drawings with the reverence other men reserved for scripture. Marcus had been the genius, the dreamer, the one who saw possibilities where others saw only problems. "You know what I'm going to build someday, Tuck?" Marcus had said one summer evening in 1978, when he was barely 25 and Tucker was preparing for his second tour overseas. "A machine that runs on nothing but steam and ingenuity. Clean power, no pollution, no dependence on oil or coal. Something that could change everything." Tucker had laughed then, not unkindly, but with the practical skepticism of a soldier who'd seen too much of the world's harsh realities. "Sounds like something out of Jules Verne, little brother," but Marcus had been serious, deadly serious. He had already earned his engineering degree from Montana State, already caught the attention of government contractors who saw potential in his unconventional ideas. Tucker had shipped out 3 weeks later, carrying the image of his brother's determined face and the sound of his ambitious dreams. When Tucker returned from his tour 18 months later, Marcus was gone, dead, according to the official report. A tragic accident at the government research facility where he'd been working. An explosion in the prototype testing lab. No remains recovered, the family was told, due to the intensity of the blast. Tucker had known it was a lie from the moment the men in suits delivered the news. Marcus was too careful, too methodical to die in a careless accident. But Tucker had been young then, still believing that persistence and proper channels could uncover truth. He'd spent 3 years fighting the bureaucracy, filing requests, demanding investigations. All he'd received in return were form letters, condolences, and a life insurance payout that felt like blood money. The path wound down towards Cedar Ridge, the small mountain town that served as Tucker's reluctant connection to civilization. Once a month, he'd make the 40-minute drive in his battered pickup truck to collect his mail, buy supplies, and endure the curious stares of people who'd never quite figured him out. Cedar Ridge had been a logging town once, back when the forests seemed inexhaustible and environmental concerns were just the concerns of tree huggers. Now it survived on tourism and the monthly pension checks of retirees who'd chosen scenic poverty over urban comfort. The main street consisted of a general store, a diner, a post office, and Murphy's Bar, the kind of place where locals nursed their beers and discussed weather, politics, and the peculiarities of their neighbors with equal gravity. Tucker tied Rex to a post outside Brennan's general store and pushed through the door, bells jingling overhead. Sarah Brennan looked up from her inventory clipboard, her weathered face creasing into a smile. At 68, she was one of the few people in town who remembered when Tucker had first arrived. Hollow-eyed and silent, buying basic supplies and asking no questions that might invite conversation. "Morning, Tucker. Rex looks like he's moving a bit slower these days." "We all are, Sarah. We all are." Tucker placed his monthly shopping list on the counter. Flour, coffee, canned goods, the basics of a simple life. "Anything interesting in the mail?" Sarah handed him a thin stack of envelopes. "Just the usual. Though I did hear something might interest you. Old Pete Morrison finally decided to sell off some of that junk in the rail yard. Having an auction next weekend." Tucker's hands stilled on the mail. The rail yard sat on the outskirts of town, a graveyard of rusted rolling stock and abandoned freight cars left over from the days when trains carried timber to distant mills. He'd driven past it countless times without much thought, but something in Sarah's tone suggested this wasn't casual information. "What kind of junk?" "Oh, you know Pete. Anything he can't burn, he's trying to sell. Railroad equipment, some old shipping containers, machinery that's been sitting there since the 70s. Probably just scrap metal, but some folks think there might be value in it." The 70s. Tucker felt something cold settle in his chest. He'd learned not to dismiss coincidences, not after a lifetime of discovering that the universe had a dark sense of humor about timing. "Might take a look," he said casually. "Pocketing the mail?" Sarah nodded, already turning back to her inventory. "Don't expect much. Most of it's been sitting out there rusting for 30 years or more." 30 years. Tucker walked back to his truck in silence, Rex padding beside him with the patient loyalty of a creature who'd learned to read his master's moods. As they drove back up the mountain road, Tucker's mind worked through the mathematics of memory. Marcus had disappeared in 1981. 30 years ago would put those containers in the rail yard right. Around the time of his brother's death, the workshop behind Tucker's cabin held the tools of a man who'd learned to fix anything and trust no one. Hand tools mostly, though he'd invested in a few pieces of electric equipment powered by his solar array. On the workbench, partially assembled, sat a rocking chair he was crafting from local oak, a commission from Sarah Brennan for her grandson's new baby. Tucker had discovered woodworking during his early years of isolation, finding peace in the rhythmic motion of playing on wood. The satisfaction of creating something useful and beautiful from raw materials. It reminded him of watching his father work, back when the Gage family had been whole and happy and unaware of the tragedy that would fracture their future. He picked up a piece of sandpaper and began smoothing the chair's armrest, letting the repetitive motion calm his thoughts. Rex settled on his favorite blanket in the corner, content to watch his master work. The dog had been with Tucker for most of his mountain years, a stray puppy who'd wandered onto the property during a particularly harsh winter and decided to stay. As the afternoon wore on, Tucker found himself thinking about the shipping containers in the rail yard. Logic told him it was foolish to read significance into Sarah's casual mention of 30-year-old cargo boxes. But intuition, the same instinct that had kept him alive through 2 tours in hostile territory, whispered. That some mysteries demanded investigation. The sun was setting behind the peaks when Tucker finally set down his tools. He walked to the kitchen and opened a can of stew for dinner, sharing half with Rex, as had become their custom. The silence of the mountains wrapped around the cabin like a familiar blanket, broken only by the occasional hoot of an owl or the distant howl of coyotes. Before bed, Tucker sat in his reading chair and pulled out the photograph he kept tucked in his wallet. It showed two young men in work clothes, arms around each other's shoulders, grinning at the camera. Marcus at 23, just out of college, his face bright with the optimism of someone who believed engineering could solve the world's problems. Tucker at 28, lean and serious in his army fatigues, home on leave between deployments. They'd been inseparable as children, despite the 5-year age gap. Tucker the protector, Marcus the dreamer. When their parents died in a car accident during Tucker's first deployment, it had been Marcus who'd handled the arrangements. Marcus, who'd sold the family house and managed their modest inheritance with mature responsibility that belied his youth. "I'm going to make you proud." "Tuck," Marcus had written in his last letter, dated 3 weeks before his supposed death. "The project I'm working on, it's going to change everything. Clean energy, sustainable transportation, a way to break free from oil dependency. I can't say much yet, but when this is finished, the world will be different." Tucker had carried that letter with him for 30 years, reading it so many times the paper had grown soft as cloth. Now as he held it in the lamplight, he noticed something he'd somehow missed before. In the margin, in Marcus's careful handwriting, were a series of numbers, SC7741B, a shipping container designation. Tucker was sure of it. He folded the letter carefully and returned it to his wallet. Tomorrow, he decided, he would drive to Cedar Ridge and have a conversation with Pete Morrison about 30-year-old mysteries rusting in an abandoned rail yard. Some questions he'd learned could wait decades for answers. But when the universe finally offered clues, only a fool would ignore them. Rex lifted his graying muzzle and whined softly, as if sensing his master's thoughts. Tucker reached down and scratched behind the dog's ears, feeling the familiar comfort of unconditional loyalty. "I know, old boy," he murmured. "I feel it too. After all these years, maybe it's time to stop running from the past and start chasing the truth." Outside, the Montana wind whispered through the pines, carrying with it the promise of change and the weight of long-buried secrets waiting to surface. Tucker Gage, mountain man and keeper of mysteries, settled into his chair and prepared for whatever tomorrow might bring. The auction began at 9 sharp on a Saturday morning that promised heat and humidity. Tucker arrived early, parking his truck at the edge of the crowd gathering around Pete Morrison's makeshift podium. Rex waited in the cab, panting in the shade, while Tucker walked among the lots with the measured pace of a man who'd learned patience through necessity. Most of the items were exactly what Sarah had predicted: rusted machinery, weathered railroad ties, scrap metal that might fetch a few dollars from salvage dealers. But Tucker's attention focused on the shipping containers, lined up like dominoes along the old loading platform. 7 containers total, each bearing the weathered scars of decades exposed to Montana weather. He found it on the 3rd container from the left, SC7741B, barely visible beneath layers of rust and grime. The numbers matched Marcus's notation exactly. Tucker's heart hammered against his ribs as he circled the container, noting the heavy padlock that had long since seized with corrosion. The dents and scratches that told stories of rough handling and hasty transport. "Interested in that old box, Tucker?" Pete Morrison had approached with the shuffling gait of a man whose joints had been worn smooth by 8 decades of hard living. His roomy eyes held curiosity but no suspicion. To him, Tucker was just another local looking for a bargain. Might be. "What's the story on these containers?" Pete scratched his stubbled chin. "Railroad brought 'em in sometime in the early 80s. Emergency storage, they said. Some kind of government contract that got cancelled before they could ship 'em out again. Been sitting here ever since, taking up space and collecting rust. Any idea what's inside?" "Hell, could be anything. Might be empty, might be full of treasure. That's the gamble, ain't it? Pete chuckled at his own wisdom. Starting bids 200 for the lot of 7. Figured somebody might want 'em for storage or scrap, Tucker nodded, keeping his expression neutral while his mind raced. $200 for 7 containers was highway robbery in favor of the buyer. Even as scrap metal, they were worth more than that. But Pete Morrison had never been accused of sharp business sense. The bidding started exactly as Pete had predicted. 200 for the lot, no other takers stepping forward. Tucker raised his hand, and the auctioneer's gavel fell with a sound like finality. Sold to Tucker Gage. You can settle up with Pete after the auction. Tucker paid in cash, as was his custom, and arranged to return with proper cutting tools. Pete handed over a ring of keys that probably hadn't worked in 20 years, along with a handwritten bill of sale that would satisfy any questions about ownership. "You planning to haul them all up to your place?" Pete asked. "Just the one for now. The rest can sit here until I figure out what to do with them." The drive back to the cabin felt longer than usual. Tucker's hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary, and Rex seemed to sense his master's tension, whining softly from the passenger seat. By the time they reached the homestead, Tucker had made his decision. Whatever was in that container, whether treasure or disappointment, he would open it today. The workshop held everything he needed: bolt cutters for the ancient padlock, pry bars for the sealed doors, work lights powered by extension cords. Tucker loaded the tools into his truck and made the return trip to Cedar Ridge, his stomach tight with anticipation that felt equal parts hope and dread. The rail yard was deserted now. The auction crowd dispersed to Saturday afternoon pursuits. Tucker backed his truck up to SC 7741B and began the careful work of opening a mystery that had waited 30 years for resolution. The padlock yielded to bolt cutters with surprising ease, as if the metal had been waiting for liberation. The real challenge lay in the container's doors, which had been sealed with what looked like military-grade weather stripping and secured with internal latches designed to keep contents safe from both elements and unauthorized access. Tucker worked methodically, using pry bars to gradually loosen the door seals. Metal groaned in protest, rust flaked away in orange clouds, and slowly, incrementally, the right-hand door began to separate from its frame. Light spilled into the container's interior for the first time in decades, revealing layers of heavy canvas tarps stretched over angular shapes. The air that escaped carried the sense of machine oil, preservatives, and something else. Something that made Tucker's chest tighten with recognition. His father's cologne. English leather, the same aftershave Marcus had worn since high school, claiming it made him sophisticated. The scent was faint but unmistakable, a ghost of memory that confirmed what Tucker's heart already knew. With trembling hands, he pulled away the first tarp. The machine beneath was like nothing Tucker had ever seen, yet somehow familiar, as if he'd encountered it in dreams or half-remembered conversations. It stood roughly 8 feet long and 4 feet high, built on what appeared to be a reinforced chassis with wheels designed for rail transport. The body was constructed from polished steel and brass fittings, with gauges and valves arranged with the precision of a fine timepiece. But it was clearly more than decorative. Steam pipes ran along the sides, connecting to a complex boiler assembly. The driving wheels were massive things, crafted with the attention to detail that marked true engineering artistry. And mounted prominently on the front was a brass nameplate that read, "Engage Prototype Steam Propulsion Unit, Patent Pending 1981. Tucker's vision blurred as emotion overwhelmed him. This was Marcus's dream made manifest. The clean energy transportation system his brother had envisioned during those late-night conversations in their father's garage. But it was more than a machine. It was proof that Marcus had lived longer than the official reports claimed, had worked on his designs beyond the supposed date of his death. Beneath the steam wagon, Tucker found a waterproof case secured with military-grade locks. Inside lay Marcus's personal journal, thick with notes and sketches, alongside technical blueprints that showed modifications and improvements to the original design. But most important was the sealed envelope tucked inside the journal's front cover, addressed in Marcus's careful handwriting, "For Tucker Gage, when the time is right." Tucker's hands shook as he opened the letter. Marcus's voice seemed to speak from the pages, clear and urgent despite the passage of years. "If you're reading this, Tuck, then something has happened to me, and the container has finally found its way to you. I've been living on borrowed time for months now, ever since I refused to let them weaponize my work. The steam propulsion system was supposed to be the beginning of clean energy, independence, a way to free transportation from oil, dependency and environmental destruction, but they want to use it for military applications. Weapons delivery systems, armored vehicles, machines of war instead of peace. When I said no, they made it clear that my cooperation wasn't optional. That's when I knew I had to disappear. The machine you found is the only working prototype. I've hidden the complete plans elsewhere, but this unit proves the concept works. Clean steam power, self-sustaining, efficient enough to revolutionize transportation if it falls into the right hands. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you the truth, brother. I'm sorry for the pain my disappearance will cause. But I couldn't let them turn my dream into a nightmare. If something happens to me, I'm trusting you to decide what to do with this knowledge. The stamps and documentation in this case will tell you who's been watching me, who wants this technology, and why they were willing to fake my death to get it. Use your judgment, Tuck. You always had better instincts about people than I did. I love you, brother. Take care of yourself and remember, sometimes the most important battles are the ones nobody knows you're fighting. Marcus. Tucker read the letter 3 times before the words fully penetrated. His brother hadn't died in 1981. He'd been forced into hiding, driven underground by people who wanted to pervert his peaceful invention into an instrument of war. And now, 30 years later, the evidence of that conspiracy sat before Tucker like an accusation demanding justice. At the bottom of the case, beneath the technical drawings, Tucker found what Marcus had referred to as documentation. Military classification stamps on official letterhead, photographs of men in suits examining steam-powered prototypes, and most damning of all, correspondence between defense contractors and government officials discussing the acquisition and redirection of Marcus Gage's research. The sun was setting. By the time Tucker finished examining the container's contents, he carefully recovered the steam wagon and secured the case containing Marcus's journal and documentation. Whatever came next, he needed time to think, to plan, to decide how to honor his brother's sacrifice and trust. As he drove home through the gathering darkness, Tucker's mind was already working through possibilities. The letter had been written 30 years ago, but the conspiracy it revealed might still be active. The people who'd driven Marcus into hiding could still be dangerous, still be watching for any sign that their secret had surfaced. But Tucker Gage had been a soldier once, trained in tactics and patience. If someone had stolen his brother's life and dreams, they would answer for it. The only question was how to proceed without becoming another casualty in a war most people didn't even know was being fought. Rex whined softly from the passenger seat, and Tucker reached over to scratch the old dog's ears. "I know, boy, everything's about to change. But maybe that's not such a bad thing. Maybe it's time the truth came out." Tucker spent the next 3 days reading Marcus's journal from cover to cover, each page revealing new layers of a conspiracy that ran deeper than he'd imagined. His brother had documented everything with the meticulous care of an engineer, dates, names, conversations, and gradually escalating threats that painted a picture of government overreach and corporate greed. The journal began innocently enough, with Marcus's excitement about being recruited for a classified energy research project in 1979. He'd been fresh out of graduate school. Brilliant and idealistic, exactly the kind of mind the government needed for its alternative energy initiatives following the oil crisis. The project was housed at a facility outside Helena, officially designated as the Advanced Propulsion Research Laboratory. Day 47, Dr. Vasquez and I achieved breakthrough in steam pressure optimization today. The efficiency ratings are beyond anything we projected. This could revolutionize not just transportation, but power generation, manufacturing, everything. Elena thinks we're looking at Nobel Prize territory, Dr. Elena Vasquez. Tucker made note of the name as he continued reading. Marcus wrote about her frequently in those early entries. A brilliant physicist in her 40s who served as the project's senior researcher. She seemed to share Marcus's vision of clean energy technology that could benefit humanity rather than enrich defense contractors. But as the journal progressed, the tone grew darker. Military officials began attending their progress meetings. Questions shifted from, how can this help solve the energy crisis? To, what's the maximum payload this system could carry? And how quickly could these units be deployed in hostile terrain? Day 156. They want us to redesign the boiler assembly to handle explosive charges. Elena refused outright, said it went against everything we're trying to accomplish. Colonel Brennan wasn't pleased. He reminded us that our funding comes from Defense Department budgets, and they expect practical applications for their investment. Tucker recognized the pattern. He'd seen it in his own military service, how projects with noble intentions could be gradually corrupted by people who saw every innovation as a potential weapon. Marcus had been naive to think his research would remain purely academic. The journal entries grew shorter and more urgent as 1981 progressed. Marcus described increased surveillance, restricted access to his own research, and pressure to sign agreements that would transfer all intellectual property rights to the military. When he and Dr. Vasquez attempted to publish their findings in civilian scientific journals, they were blocked by classification orders. Day 203. Elena received a visit at her home last night. Two men in suits politely explaining that her family's safety depended on her continued cooperation. She's terrified, but still refusing to weaponize our work. I have to get her out of this, but I don't know how. Day 215. They've separated Elena and me, claimed it's for security compartmentalization. I haven't seen her in 3 weeks. My new partner is Dr. Morrison, young, ambitious, and clearly working directly for the military interests. He keeps pushing modifications that would make the steam units suitable for armor mounting. Tucker felt cold anger building as he read his brother's account of systematic intimidation and coercion. Marcus had been trapped in a system that viewed his genius as property to be exploited, his conscience as an obstacle to be overcome. The final entries revealed Marcus's desperate plan to preserve his work's original intent. He'd been secretly building a working prototype using materials diverted from the official project, documenting the true capabilities of clean steam propulsion while his handlers thought he was developing weapon systems. Day 267. It's finished. The prototype performs exactly as we originally envisioned. Clean, efficient, revolutionary. I've hidden the complete specifications where they'll never find them, and arranged for the prototype itself to be stored safely until someone I trust can continue the work. Elena managed to get word to me through channels I won't document here. She's been transferred to a consulting position in Arizona, effective exile from the project. At least she's alive and free. They're planning to eliminate me tomorrow. I've seen the classified memorandum ordering my removal as a security risk. The official story will be a laboratory accident, explosion in the prototype bay, no remains recovered. Clean and simple. If I disappear, the world will think Marcus Gage died trying to build weapons for the military. The truth is that Marcus Gage died trying to prevent his peaceful technology from becoming an instrument of war. Tuck, if you ever read this, know that I regret nothing except not being able to say goodbye properly. The container and its contents are my legacy. Use them wisely. Tucker closed the journal and sat in silence for a long time. Outside his cabin windows, the Montana wilderness continued its eternal rhythms, indifferent to human betrayal and loss. Rex lay at his feet, occasionally lifting his graying muzzle to study his master's face with patient concern. The implications were staggering. Not only had the government faked his brother's death, they'd stolen his research and presumably continued developing weapons applications. Marcus had been murdered. There was no other word for it, by the very people who should have been protecting American innovation and ingenuity. But Marcus had also been clever. He'd hidden the prototype and documentation where government agents wouldn't think to look, disguised among surplus equipment in a forgotten rail yard. And he'd mentioned Dr. Elena Vasquez's transfer to Arizona, suggesting she might still be alive, still be a potential source of information. Tucker walked to his workshop and retrieved a road atlas from his reference shelf. Arizona was a big state, but if Elena Vasquez was still using her real name, she shouldn't be impossible to find. The internet would have made such searches easier, but Tucker had never felt the need for modern connectivity in his mountain retreat. Sometimes the old ways worked better for a man who valued privacy. He would need to visit the public library in Missoula, use their computers to search for Dr. Elena Vasquez. If she was alive and willing to talk, she might be able to fill in the gaps in Marcus's story. She might even know whether his brother had survived the fake death or had actually been killed in the cover-up. That night, Tucker made his decision. He would secure the prototype and documentation in a hidden location on his property, then travel to Arizona to find Elena Vasquez. After 30 years of living with questions, he finally had leads worth following. He spent the following morning constructing a concealed storage space beneath his workshop floor, using skills learned during covert operations overseas. The hiding place was invisible unless someone knew exactly where to look, protected from moisture and temperature extremes. Marcus's steam wagon would wait there, safe and secret, until Tucker decided what to do with the knowledge it represented. As he worked, Tucker found himself thinking about Elena Vasquez, a woman who'd stood up to military pressure, who'd refused to compromise her principles even when threatened. She and Marcus had been kindred spirits, united by their vision of technology, serving humanity rather than destroying it. If she was still alive, still fighting the same battle, Tucker needed to find her. Rex watched the preparations with the stoic patience of a creature who'd learned to accept his master's occasional mysterious projects. But even the old dog seemed to sense that something significant was happening, that the quiet routine of their mountain life was about to be disrupted. Tucker secured the prototype and sealed the hiding place, then stood in his workshop feeling the weight of inherited responsibility. Marcus had trusted him with more than family secrets. He'd trusted him with the power to expose a conspiracy that had cost lives and perverted scientific progress for 3 decades. The question now was whether Tucker Gage, mountain man and keeper of secrets, had the courage to become Tucker Gage, seeker of justice and avenger of the innocent. The answer, he realized, had never really been in doubt. The Missoula Public Library's computer terminals hummed with the quiet efficiency of modern technology that Tucker found both useful and unsettling. He'd driven the 2 hours from his mountain home with Rex riding shotgun, the old dog content to wait in the truck, while Tucker navigated the unfamiliar waters of internet research. Finding Dr. Elena Vasquez proved easier than expected. A simple search revealed that she was living at Desert Springs Retirement Community in Scottsdale, Arizona. The facility's website featured a photograph from their monthly newsletter, showing residents engaged in various activities. There, in the corner of a group photo taken in the community garden, was a face Tucker recognized from Marcus's journal descriptions, older now, silver-haired and wearing glasses. But unmistakably, the woman who'd worked alongside his brother. The drive to Arizona would take 2 days, maybe 3 if he traveled at a pace comfortable for Rex. Tucker made the decision immediately. 30 years of questions deserved answers, and Elena Vasquez might be the only person alive who could provide them. Desert Springs Retirement Community occupied a sprawling complex of adobe-style buildings surrounded by meticulously maintained desert landscaping. Tucker felt out of place among the palm trees and carefully controlled environment, his mountain clothing and weathered pickup truck marking him as clearly foreign. to this world of managed comfort. The receptionist, a cheerful woman in her 30s, directed him to the community garden where Dr. Vasquez spent most afternoons. Tucker found her tending a small plot of tomatoes and herbs, her movements careful but determined despite her 78 years. Dr. Vasquez. She looked up, shading her eyes against the Arizona sun. When she saw Tucker's face, her expression shifted from polite curiosity to something approaching recognition. "You have his eyes," she said quietly. "Marcus's eyes. You must be Tucker." The simple acknowledgement hit Tucker harder than he'd expected. For 30 years, no one had connected him to his lost brother. Here was someone who remembered Marcus not as a government casualty or classified footnote, but as a living person with family who loved him. "You knew I existed? Marcus talked about you constantly. His big brother, the soldier who kept him safe when they were children. He was so proud of your service record, so worried about your deployments overseas." Eleanor set down her gardening tools and studied Tucker's face. "He never stopped hoping he'd see you again." They walked to a shaded bench beneath a desert willow tree. Elena moved slowly, and Tucker noticed the slight tremor in her hands that suggested age-related neurological issues. But her mind seemed sharp, her memory clear when she spoke about the past. "I assume you found the container," she said. "Marcus was very particular about those numbers. Said you'd recognize them when the time was right." Tucker pulled the faded photograph from his wallet, the one showing him and Marcus together in happier times. Elena smiled when she saw it, her eyes softening with remembered affection. He carried a copy of that picture in his wallet. Used to say it reminded him why he was fighting so hard to keep his work peaceful. "Family meant everything to Marcus. Tell me what really happened." "The journal explains some of it, but I need to know how it ended." Elena was quiet for a long moment, gathering memories that were clearly both precious and painful. Marcus was brilliant, but he was also naive about how power works in government circles. He truly believed that good intentions would protect him, that scientific integrity meant something to the people controlling our funding. She described the gradual pressure that had been applied to their research team, the way military applications had slowly consumed their peaceful energy project. Elena had been the senior researcher, supposedly protected by tenure and reputation. But even she had been vulnerable to implicit threats about her family's safety. They separated us in the final months. Assigned Marcus to work with Dr. Morrison on weaponization protocols. Morrison was young, ambitious, completely willing to serve military interests without question. He reported everything Marcus said or did directly to Colonel Brennan. Did Marcus really die in 1981? Elena's hands trembled more noticeably. "I don't know. I've wondered about that for 30 years, hoped against hope that he somehow escaped. The explosion was real. I heard it from across the facility, saw the smoke and fire trucks. But I never saw remains, never had definitive proof that Marcus was actually killed." Tucker felt a spark of hope, dangerous, but irresistible. Where would he have gone? If he survived, where would Marcus hide? He had friends from graduate school, other engineers who shared his vision of clean technology. There was one in particular, David Chen, working for a small renewable energy company in Oregon. Marcus mentioned him several times, said David was one of the few people he trusted completely. Elena reached into her gardening bag and retrieved a small brass key, its surface tarnished with age. "Marcus gave me this 2 days before the explosion. Said if anything happened to him, I should keep it safe until someone from his family came looking for answers." The key was warm from her touch, solid and purposeful in Tucker's palm. "What does it open?" "A safety deposit box at First National Bank in Phoenix. Box number 847. Marcus registered it under an assumed name, Thomas Gardner, but he arranged for family access if proper identification was provided." Tucker stared at the key, feeling the weight of 30 years' worth of secrets condensed into a few ounces of brass. "Why didn't you use it yourself?" Elena's smile was sad but understanding. "It wasn't meant for me. Marcus was very specific. This was for family, for someone who had the right to know the whole truth. "I've been waiting 3 decades to give it to you." A young man approached their bench, concern evident in his expression. "Grandma Elena, you've been out here for hours." "Mum's worried about the heat." Elena introduced her grandson David, a software engineer in his late 20s, who'd inherited her careful manner and intelligent eyes. Tucker watched the family interaction with a mixture of longing and gratitude. Elena had people who cared about her welfare, who ensured she was safe and comfortable in her golden years. David, this is Tucker Gage. He's the brother of someone I worked with many years ago. David shook Tucker's hand with genuine warmth. "Any friend of Grandma's is welcome here." "Are you staying long in Scottsdale?" "Just passing through," Tucker replied. "But I'm grateful for the chance to meet your grandmother. She's helped me understand some important family history." As they prepared to part, Elena gripped Tucker's arm with surprising strength. "Be careful. The people who destroyed our project, who drove Marcus into hiding or worse, some of them may still be alive, still be powerful. They won't appreciate having their secrets exposed." Tucker nodded, pocketing the brass key carefully. "Do you regret it? The research, the stands you took?" "Never. Science should serve humanity, not destroy it. Marcus understood that, died for it if necessary. If you find proof that he survived, that he continued fighting for his principles, then everything we suffered was worthwhile." The drive back to Montana felt different, charged with purpose and possibility. Rex seemed to sense his master's renewed energy, sitting alertly in the passenger seat as they covered mile after mile of desert highway. Tucker's mind was already working through the logistics of reaching Phoenix, of accessing whatever Marcus had hidden in that safety deposit box. 30 years after his brother's disappearance, he finally had concrete leads to follow, real hope that answers might be within reach. But Elena's warning echoed in his thoughts as well. If powerful people had conspired to steal Marcus's research and eliminate him as a threat, they might not appreciate a mountain man with military training, asking uncomfortable questions about the past. Tucker Gage had spent 15 years learning to live quietly, avoiding attention and conflict. But some fights, he was beginning to understand, were worth the risk. His brother had died defending principles that mattered. The least Tucker could do was honor that sacrifice by seeking the truth. Whatever the cost, First National Bank of Phoenix occupied a gleaming tower of glass and steel that made Tucker feel like an anachronism in his flannel shirt and worn jeans. The security guard eyed him with professional suspicion, but Tucker's identification and Elena's brass key proved sufficient to gain access to the safety deposit box area. David Chen, Elena's grandson, had insisted on accompanying Tucker to Phoenix, claiming curiosity about his grandmother's mysterious past. Tucker suspected the young man's motives ran deeper than mere interest, but appreciated having someone familiar with modern banking procedures to navigate the bureaucratic requirements. The safety deposit box clerk, a precise woman in her 50s, examined Tucker's documentation with bureaucratic thoroughness before leading them to a private viewing room. Box 847 was larger than Tucker had expected, deep enough to contain substantial documents or objects. "Take your time," the clerk said, closing the door behind her. "Ring the bell when you're finished." Tucker inserted Elena's key with hands that trembled slightly from anticipation. The lock turned smoothly, as if it had been waiting 30 years for this moment. Inside the box lay a collection of items that represented Marcus's final preparations for whatever fate awaited him. On top was a videotaped message labeled, "For Tucker Gage, personal and confidential." Beneath that, rolled blueprints secured with rubber bands, photographs of machinery Tucker didn't recognize, and a second brass key attached to a tag reading Oregon Storage Unit 247. But it was the photographs that made Tucker's breath catch. They showed Marcus, clearly alive and working, in what appeared to be a machine shop or laboratory. His brother looked older than in the family pictures Tucker carried, hair graying at the temples, face lined with the stress of a man living under assumed identity. But he was unmistakably alive, working on what appeared to be an improved version of his steam propulsion system. "David," Tucker said quietly, "your grandmother mentioned that Marcus had friends in Oregon. Engineers working on renewable energy projects." David looked up from examining the blueprints spread across the table. "She did say something about that. A company called Green River Technologies, I think. Small outfit working on alternative energy solutions." Tucker's pulse quickened. The photographs showed Marcus in what could easily be a private research facility, the kind of place where an engineer with a new identity might continue his life's work. If these pictures were recent, and they appeared to be taken with modern equipment, then Marcus could still be alive. The videotaped message presented a logistical challenge. Neither Tucker nor David carried equipment capable of playing the antiquated format, but David's technical background suggested solutions. "There's an electronics shop downtown that transfers old media to digital formats," David offered. "They could probably convert this to something we can watch on a laptop." An hour later, they sat in David's rental car outside the electronics shop, watching Marcus Gage speak to them across 30 years of separation and secrets. The video quality was poor, clearly recorded in haste under stressful conditions, but Marcus's voice was exactly as Tucker remembered. "If you're watching this, Tuck, then you've found the evidence Elena and I prepared for you. I'm sorry for the deception, sorry for letting you believe I was dead. But the people hunting me don't take prisoners, and involving you would have put your life in danger. By now, you've seen the prototype and read my journal. You know why I had to disappear, why I couldn't let them turn my work into an instrument of war. What you don't know is that I survived the explosion at the facility. Elena helped me stage my death, gave me time to escape before the authorities arrived. I've been living under the name Thomas Gardner, continuing my research in secret. The steam propulsion technology works even better than we originally projected. Clean energy, sustainable transportation, revolutionary applications for both civilian and industrial uses. But the military-industrial complex that destroyed our original project is still active, still developing weapons based on stolen versions of my early designs. They've created abominations of the technology, using it to power military vehicles and weapon systems that would horrify you. I've been working on a way to expose their theft, to prove that the peaceful applications were the original intent. The storage unit in Oregon contains my current prototype and documentation that could bring down some very powerful people. I don't know if I'll live to see justice done. The men hunting me are persistent and well-funded. But if something happens to me, I'm trusting you to decide whether the world should know the truth about clean energy technology and government corruption. Find Thomas Gardner in Corvallis, Oregon. That's where I've been hiding, where I've continued the work. The key in this box will open Storage Unit 247 at Secure Space Storage. Inside, you'll find everything needed to expose the conspiracy that stole my life and perverted my research. I love you, brother. I've missed you every day for 30 years. Whatever you decide to do with this information, know that you've been my inspiration throughout this long exile. The hope of seeing you again has kept me fighting when everything else seemed hopeless. The video ended with Marcus reaching toward the camera, his face etched with exhaustion and determination. Tucker sat in stunned silence, processing the revelation that his brother was, or had been, alive and working somewhere in Oregon. "When was this recorded?" Tucker asked. David checked the digital file properties on his laptop. The conversion shop said the original tape was probably from the early 2000s, based on the video quality and magnetic signature. So maybe 15, 20 years ago, which meant Marcus could still be alive, still be working under his assumed identity in Oregon. Tucker felt hope and anxiety warring in his chest. After 30 years of believing his brother was dead, the possibility of reunion seemed almost too overwhelming to contemplate. But Marcus's warning about persistent hunters couldn't be ignored. If government agents or defense contractors were still tracking down loose ends from the 1981 cover-up, Then Tucker's investigation might have already attracted unwanted attention. David, I need to ask you something important. Are you willing to help me find your grandmother's old colleague? This isn't a game. The people involved have already killed to protect their secrets. David's response was immediate and determined. Grandma Elena spent 30 years wondering what happened to Marcus, whether he was alive or dead. If there's a chance we can find him, give her that closure. Then I'm in completely. Tucker nodded, feeling grateful for the young man's loyalty and courage. Then we're going to Oregon. But first, we need to be very careful about how we travel and who we talk to. If Marcus was right about being hunted, then we might be walking into significant danger. They spent the evening planning their route to Corvallis, researching Thomas Gardner's possible addresses, and preparing for a journey that might end in reunion or tragedy. Tucker carried Marcus's videotaped message in his jacket pocket, a tangible connection to the brother he'd thought lost forever. Rex waited patiently in the hotel room, sensing his master's excitement but unable to understand the cause. Tucker scratched the old dog's ears and promised him they'd be home soon, hopefully with answers to questions that had haunted the Gage family for 3 decades. The drive to Oregon took them through some of the most beautiful country in America, but Tucker barely noticed the scenery. His mind was consumed with memories of childhood adventures he'd shared with Marcus, stories he'd planned to tell if they ever met again, and questions that had accumulated over 30 years of separation. David proved to be an ideal traveling companion, curious but not intrusive, helpful without being pushy. As they covered mile after mile of interstate highway, Tucker found himself sharing war stories and life lessons with the young man, grateful for the distraction from his churning emotions. "Tell me about Marcus when you were kids," David said, as they crossed into Oregon. "Grandma Elena always described him as brilliant but naive. What was he like as a little brother?" Tucker smiled, reaching into his jacket pocket to touch the brass compass he'd carried since childhood, Marcus's gift to him before his first deployment overseas. The compass had guided him through hostile terrain in 2 wars and 15 years of mountain solitude. Now it was leading him toward the most important navigation of his life. Marcus was the kind of kid who took apart alarm clocks to see how they worked, then actually managed to put them back together. When he was 12, he built a working steam engine out of soup cans and bicycle parts. Set our mother's garden shed on fire testing it. But the principle was sound. The memories came flooding back as they drove through the Columbia River Gorge. Marcus, at age 8, explaining to their father why the family car would run better if they modified the carburetor. Marcus, at 15, winning the state science fair with a solar panel design he'd developed in the garage. Marcus, at 23, calling Tucker overseas to excitedly describe his acceptance into the government research program that would ultimately destroy his life. He always believed that engineering could solve the world's problems. Tucker continued. Clean energy, efficient transportation, sustainable technology. He saw solutions where other people saw obstacles. Sounds like Grandma Eleanor, David observed. She still talks about renewable energy like it's a moral crusade. Corvallis, Oregon, turned out to be a small college town dominated by Oregon State University and filled with the kind of environmentally conscious businesses that would attract someone like Marcus. They found Thomas Gardner's address in the phone directory, a modest house on the outskirts of town, surrounded by the kind of workshop buildings that suggested serious mechanical work. Tucker's heart hammered as they drove past the property. The house looked lived in, but not currently occupied, with newspapers accumulating on the front porch and an overgrown garden that suggested recent neglect. A small sign by the mailbox read, T. Gardner, Custom Mechanical Repair. Looks like he's been gone for a while, David said quietly. They parked at a nearby coffee shop and spent the afternoon making discreet inquiries about Thomas Gardner. The picture that emerged was of a quiet, skilled mechanic who specialized in restoring antique machinery and had lived in the community for nearly 20 years. Neighbors described him as friendly but private. Someone who kept to himself but was always willing to help with mechanical problems. Haven't seen Tom in maybe 6 months, said the owner of the hardware store, where Gardner apparently bought supplies. Used to come in regular for specialty parts and materials. Heard he might have moved away, but he didn't say goodbye or anything. Tucker felt disappointment settling in his chest like a physical weight. After coming so close to finding Marcus, they seemed to have missed him by months. But the storage unit key still offered hope. Whatever Marcus had hidden there might provide clues to his current whereabouts. Secure space storage occupied a sprawling complex of metal buildings on the industrial edge of Corvallis. Unit 247 was located in the rear section, away from the main office and casual observation. Tucker's hands shook slightly as he inserted Marcus's key into the lock. The unit contained what appeared to be a complete mechanical workshop, tools, equipment and workbenches, arranged with the same methodical precision Tucker remembered from their father's garage. But the centerpiece was a machine that took Tucker's breath away. Marcus's final prototype stood in the center of the space like a mechanical work of art. The steam propulsion unit had evolved far beyond the version hidden in the shipping container. This model was sleek, efficient, and obviously functional. A clean energy generator that could have revolutionized transportation if it had fallen into the right hands. But it was the wall of documentation that truly told the story. Photographs showing military vehicles powered by stolen versions of Marcus's technology. Technical specifications proving that defense contractors had reverse-engineered his peaceful designs into weapons systems. Financial records detailing the profits made from perverted applications of technology intended to benefit humanity. "This is incredible," David whispered, examining blueprints that showed applications for everything from clean power generation to sustainable transportation. Your brother wasn't just ahead of his time, he was decades ahead. Tucker found Marcus's final notebook on the workbench, filled with recent entries dated just 6 months earlier. The handwriting was older, shakier than in the original journal, but unmistakably his brother's. "They found me again. After 20 years of peace, the hunters are closing in. Someone leaked my location, probably traced through supply purchases or utility records. I have maybe weeks before they arrive. The prototype is complete. Everything I dreamed of in 1981, perfected through decades of secret research. Clean energy, sustainable technology, proof that weapons were never the intended application. I'm too old to run again, too tired to start over in another identity. If they want to silence me, they'll have to do it publicly now. I've prepared evidence packages for journalists, scientists, and environmental groups. The truth will come out whether I live to see it or not. Tucker, if you're reading this, I'm either dead or in hiding so deep that Thomas Gardner has ceased to exist. Don't mourn for me. I've had 30 years longer than they intended to give me, 30 years to perfect the work and prepare the evidence. The compass I gave you when we were kids. Follow it home, brother. Follow it to the truth." Tucker pulled the brass compass from his pocket, studying its familiar weight and craftsmanship. Marcus had been clever even as a child, hiding meanings within meanings. The compass didn't just provide direction, it provided guidance, purpose, the moral bearing needed to navigate difficult decisions. "David, we need to get this evidence to people who can use it. Journalists, scientists, someone with the platform to expose what really happened." But as they prepared to leave the storage unit, Tucker noticed a black sedan parked across the street from the facility entrance. 2 men in suits sat inside, watching the storage complex with professional patience. "We're not alone," Tucker said quietly, his military training automatically assessing threat levels and escape routes. "Someone's been waiting for us to lead them here." David's face went pale as he realized the implications. "You think they've been following us since Phoenix?" Tucker was already moving, gathering the most crucial documents and evidence while planning their exit strategy. Marcus had been right about persistent hunters. The question now was whether Tucker's old skills were sufficient to keep them alive long enough to honor his brother's sacrifice. The brass compass seemed to grow warm in Tucker's pocket, as if Marcus himself was providing guidance for the dangerous path ahead. Some truths Tucker realized were worth dying for. The challenge was staying alive long enough to share them with the world. Tucker guided David through the back exit of the storage facility, using skills learned in hostile territory to avoid the surveillance team. They made it to David's rental car through a maze of industrial buildings, but Tucker knew their pursuers wouldn't be far behind. Professional hunters had resources and patience that ordinary citizens couldn't match. They drove in silence for 20 minutes, taking random turns and doubling back through residential neighborhoods to ensure they weren't being followed. Only when Tucker was satisfied they'd lost the surveillance did he direct David to a small roadside diner where they could regroup and plan their next move. The diner was the kind of place that attracted truckers and shift workers, anonymous, cash-friendly, and unlikely to ask questions about strangers seeking privacy. Tucker chose a booth in the back corner where he could watch both entrances while they examined the evidence they'd rescued from Marcus's storage unit. "Your brother documented everything," David said, spreading photographs across the table. "Look at these military vehicles. They're clearly using his steam propulsion technology, but configured for weapons delivery and armor support." Tucker studied the images with growing anger. Marcus's peaceful energy innovation had been perverted into exactly what he'd feared most: machines of war designed to kill rather than create. Tanks powered by clean steam technology, weapons platforms that could operate silently in hostile terrain, mobile artillery systems that left no exhaust signature for enemy detection. But it was the financial documentation that revealed the true scope of the conspiracy. Defense contractors had made billions from technology they'd stolen after faking Marcus's death. Patents had been filed under corporate names, with no mention of the original inventor. Marcus Gage's revolutionary work had been erased from history, while others profited from his genius. "This goes all the way to the top," Tucker said, pointing to correspondence between defense officials and government contractors. Senator Morrison, General Blackwood, executives from 3 major weapons manufacturers. They didn't just steal Marcus's research, they built an entire industry around it. David's face went pale as he recognized one of the names. "Morrison. That's the same name as the agent who was following us. You think they're related?" Before Tucker could answer, the diner's front door opened, and 2 men in dark suits entered. They moved with the professional confidence of federal agents, their eyes scanning the room with practiced efficiency. Tucker recognized them immediately as the surveillance team from the storage facility. "Back door," Tucker whispered, already moving. "Leave everything except the most crucial documents." But as they reached the rear exit, it opened to reveal a third man, younger than the others. With the kind of lean build and alert posture that suggested military background, he was blocking their escape route with casual authority, one hand resting near his jacket where a weapon would be concealed. "Gentlemen," the young man said, his voice carrying a slight southern accent. "Agent Morrison, Department of Defense Security. We need to have a conversation." Tucker's mind raced through tactical options. 3 armed professionals in a confined space with civilian bystanders who could be hurt in any confrontation. His military training provided solutions, but they all involved unacceptable risks to innocent people. "What kind of conversation?" Tucker asked, keeping his hands visible while calculating distances and angles. "The kind where you tell me what you've learned about Thomas Gardner's research, and I explain why it's in everyone's best interest to forget this investigation ever happened." Agent Morrison gestured toward an empty booth, his movement casual but unmistakably threatening. The other 2 agents had positioned themselves to control the main entrance and prevent any attempt at flight. Tucker and David sat across from Morrison, who spread his own collection of photographs on the table. These images showed Marcus, clearly identifiable, despite 30 years of aging, working in various laboratories and workshops over the past decades. "Thomas Gardner has been a person of interest for over 20 years, Morrison explained. "We know about his real identity, his research activities, and his ongoing efforts to undermine national security through unauthorized technology disclosure." National security? Tucker's voice carried dangerous edge. My brother invented clean energy technology. How is that a threat to anything except corporate profits? Morrison's smile was cold and professional. Your brother developed technology with significant military applications. When he refused to cooperate with lawful government requests for full disclosure, he became a security risk. His subsequent theft of classified materials and unauthorized continuation of restricted research made him a fugitive. That's not what happened, David interjected. The research was stolen from him. The military applications were never his intention. Intention is irrelevant, Morrison replied. Results matter. The technology exists. It has strategic value. And civilian control of such capabilities presents unacceptable risks to national defense. Tucker studied the young agent's face, noting the resemblance to someone he'd seen in Marcus's documentation. You're related to Senator Morrison, aren't you? The one who was involved in the original cover-up? Morrison's professional composure cracked slightly. My grandfather served his country with distinction. He understood that sometimes difficult decisions must be made to protect American interests. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. This wasn't just about government bureaucracy or military security. It was personal. The Morrison family had built their political dynasty on profits from stolen technology, and they couldn't afford to have that foundation exposed. Where is my brother? Tucker demanded. Marcus Gage died in a laboratory accident in 1981. Thomas Gardner is a fugitive who stole classified government property and has been evading lawful apprehension for decades. When we locate him, he'll face charges for treason, theft of military secrets, and violation of national security statutes. But Morrison's answer revealed more than he'd intended. If they were still hunting for Marcus, then he was likely still alive, still free, still working somewhere beyond their reach. Tucker made his decision with the clarity that comes from moral certainty. I'm not helping you find him, and I'm not forgetting what I've learned about the conspiracy that stole his life's work. Morrison's facade of professional courtesy evaporated. Mr. Gage, you don't understand the situation. Your brother's technology in the wrong hands could destabilize military balances worldwide. We're not the villains here. We're the people trying to prevent global catastrophe by profiting from stolen research and murdering inconvenient inventors, by making hard choices that civilians don't have the clearance or judgment to understand. Tucker recognized the logic of people who'd convinced themselves that any action was justified by sufficiently important goals. He'd seen that mentality before. In war zones, where good intentions gradually corrupted into something monstrous. The encrypted hard drive David had discovered in Marcus's storage unit lay hidden in Tucker's jacket pocket, containing decades of evidence about government corruption and corporate theft. Morrison and his team clearly didn't know about it, or they'd have mentioned it specifically. What do you want from us? Tucker asked. Cooperation. An agreement to cease this investigation and return any materials you've obtained to proper authorities. In exchange, you walk away from this with no charges filed and no further government interest in your activities. And if we refuse, Morrison's smile returned colder than before, then you become persons of interest in an ongoing national security investigation. Your mountain property gets searched, your financial records get examined, your daily activities get monitored indefinitely. Tucker felt the weight of decision pressing down on him. He could accept Morrison's offer, return to his quiet mountain life, and pretend he'd never learned the truth about Marcus's fate. It would be the safe choice, the practical choice, but the brass compass in his pocket seemed to grow warm against his chest, reminding him of promises made and family bonds that transcended personal safety. I need time to think, Tucker said finally. Morrison checked his watch with theatrical precision. You have 24 hours. Tomorrow at noon we meet again. You bring everything you've taken from Gardner's storage unit, and we discuss the terms of your cooperation. As the agents filed out of the diner, Morrison paused at Tucker's booth. Mr. Gage, your brother made the mistake of believing his principles were more important than practical realities. I hope you're wiser than he was. Tucker watched them leave, then turned to David. Are you ready for this to get much more dangerous? David's jaw was set with determination that reminded Tucker of Elena's stubborn courage. "Your brother spent 30 years fighting for something he believed in. The least we can do is make sure his sacrifice meant something." Tucker nodded, feeling the weight of inherited responsibility and the guidance of Marcus's compass. The conspiracy was larger and more powerful than he'd imagined, but it had a weakness, its dependence on secrecy. If they could get Marcus's evidence to the right people, expose the truth to public scrutiny, then even Senator Morrison's political dynasty couldn't survive the scandal. The question was whether they could stay alive long enough to honor Marcus's legacy and bring justice to light. Tucker and David spent that night in a motel room 40 miles from Corvallis, hunched over David's laptop as they worked to decode the information on Marcus's encrypted hard drive. The device contained 30 years of meticulous documentation, photographs, financial records, technical specifications, and correspondence that painted a damning picture of systematic corruption. "This is incredible," David whispered, scrolling through files that showed the progression of Marcus's stolen technology, from peaceful energy research to military weapons systems. "Your brother documented everything. Look at this. Patent applications filed by defense contractors using his exact specifications. Dated months after his supposed death." Tucker studied the screen, feeling his anger crystallize into cold determination. Marcus hadn't just been a victim. He'd been a strategic thinker who'd spent decades building a case against his persecutors. Every file on the drive was carefully organized, cross-referenced, and supported by multiple sources of evidence. He was preparing for this moment, Tucker realized. All these years, he wasn't just hiding, he was gathering proof, building an unassailable case against the people who stole his life's work. The most damning files showed correspondence between Senator Morrison and defense contractors discussing the acquisition and redirection of clean energy research. The language was careful, legally defensible, but the intent was clear. They targeted Marcus specifically because his technology threatened their fossil fuel investments while offering revolutionary military applications. But the drive contained something even more valuable, evidence that Marcus was still alive and still working. The most recent files were dated just 3 months earlier, including photographs of a new prototype that made his previous work look primitive by comparison. "He's been in contact with someone," David said, pointing to email exchanges with an address identified only as Truth Seeker 47. "Look at these messages. They're coordinating some kind of public disclosure." Tucker read the exchanges with growing excitement. Marcus and his mysterious contact had been planning to release the evidence publicly, to expose the conspiracy through multiple media outlets simultaneously. The plan had been interrupted by Morrison's agents closing in, but the framework was still in place. Truth Seeker 47 mentions having connections with investigative journalists and environmental groups, Tucker noted. "If we could make contact, continue Marcus's plan, we'd need to find him first," David interrupted. "The emails mention a meeting place, but it's coded somehow." Tucker studied the message thread more carefully, applying the same methodical analysis he'd used for military intelligence. Marcus had always been clever with codes and hidden meanings, even as a child. The references to the place where steam meets sky and coordinates from the gift of childhood suggested personal significance rather than random encryption. "Steam meets sky," Tucker mused. "That sounds like something from our childhood. We used to go—" He stopped, memory flooding back with sudden clarity. "Mount Hood. There's a hot springs resort near the base of Mount Hood where our parents took us camping every summer. Marcus always said it was where Earth's steam met heaven's sky." David pulled up a map on his laptop. "Mount Hood Hot Springs Resort, about 2 hours from here. But what about the coordinates from the gift of childhood?" Tucker pulled the brass compass from his pocket, studying its familiar face with new understanding. Marcus had given him this compass when he was 12 years old, inscribed with what Tucker had always assumed were decorative markings. But now, examining them more closely, he realized they weren't decorative at all. They were coordinates. 45 degrees, 21 minutes north. 121 degrees, 43 minutes west. Tucker checked the coordinates against David's map. That's the exact location of the hot springs resort. They prepared to leave immediately, but Tucker insisted on taking precautions that reflected his military background. He purchased basic camping equipment and supplies for an extended stay in wilderness terrain, along with communication equipment that would work in areas beyond cell phone coverage. "If this goes wrong," Tucker told David as they loaded the car, "you drive straight to the nearest FBI field office and give them copies of everything we've found. Don't trust local law enforcement. Morrison's family has too much political influence." David nodded, but his jaw was set with determination that reminded Tucker of Elena's stubborn courage. "Nothing's going wrong. We're going to find Marcus, expose the truth, and make sure these people answer for what they've done." The drive to Mount Hood took them through some of Oregon's most beautiful countryside, but Tucker barely noticed the scenery. His mind was focused on the upcoming reunion with his brother, the culmination of 30 years of questions and grief. Rex dozed in the back seat, occasionally lifting his graying muzzle to study his master's tense posture. Mount Hood Hot Springs Resort occupied a scenic valley at the base of Oregon's most prominent peak. The facility had been modernized since Tucker's childhood visits, but the essential character remained unchanged. Natural hot springs, feeding pools carved from volcanic stone, surrounded by old-growth forest that seemed untouched by time. They checked into separate cabins and spent the afternoon reconnoitering the area, identifying potential meeting places and escape routes. Tucker's military experience proved invaluable as he assessed the terrain for tactical advantages and vulnerabilities. As evening approached, they made their way to the coordinates specified by Marcus's compass. The location turned out to be a secluded hot spring pool fed by underground thermal vents, accessible only by a narrow trail through dense forest. It was exactly the kind of place Marcus would choose, private, defensible, and rich with childhood memories. Tucker heard footsteps on the trail long before he saw their source. His hand moved instinctively toward the concealed pistol he'd carried since leaving Montana, but he forced himself to remain calm. After 30 years of separation, this reunion deserved better than suspicion and fear. The man who emerged from the forest shadows was clearly Marcus, despite the changes wrought by time and stress. His hair had gone completely gray, his face was lined with worry and exhaustion, but his eyes held the same intelligent warmth Tucker remembered from their youth. "Hello, Tuck." The simple greeting hit Tucker harder than any elaborate speech could have. This was his brother, alive and real after 3 decades of believing him dead. Tucker felt 30 years of grief and guilt lifting from his shoulders like a physical weight. "Marcus." Tucker's voice cracked with emotion. "I thought the report said I know what they said. I'm sorry for letting you believe it, but involving you would have meant signing your death warrant." Marcus stepped forward hesitantly, as if uncertain of his welcome. "I've thought about you every day for 30 years. Wondered if you'd forgive me for disappearing." Tucker crossed the distance between them in 2 quick steps and embraced his brother with fierce intensity. "There's nothing to forgive. I understand why you had to run, why you couldn't contact me. I just wish, I wish things could have been different too." They sat on the stone edge of the hot spring pool, and Marcus explained what had happened since his staged death. Elena had helped him escape the facility after creating evidence of a fatal explosion. He'd lived quietly under assumed identities, continuing his research while documenting the systematic theft of his technology. "They perverted everything I tried to create," Marcus said, his voice heavy with regret. "Clean energy became weapons technology. Peaceful transportation became military vehicles. My dream of helping humanity became a nightmare of enhanced warfare." "But you never stopped fighting," Tucker observed. "The evidence you've gathered, it's enough to bring down everyone involved in the conspiracy." Marcus nodded toward David, who'd been listening in respectful silence. "Elena's grandson has been invaluable in preparing the digital evidence packages. We've identified journalists and scientists who can't be bought or intimidated, people with the platform and courage to expose the truth. When do we make the disclosure? Tucker asked. Tomorrow. Truth Seeker 47. That's Dr. Sarah Martinez. An investigative journalist with the Washington Post has agreed to publish our evidence simultaneously with releases to environmental groups and scientific journals. Once the information is public, Morrison and his people can't suppress it without making the situation worse. But Marcus's expression remained troubled, despite their apparent success. There's something else, Tuck. The final prototype I've been working on, it's more than just evidence of theft. It's a functioning demonstration that could revolutionize energy production worldwide. But it also represents a target that Morrison's people will kill to acquire. Tucker felt the familiar weight of tactical decision-making settling on his shoulders. Where is the prototype? Hidden in a cave system about 2 miles from here. I've been using it as a workshop for the final assembly and testing. But if Morrison's agents have tracked you here, they have, Tucker confirmed. We lost them yesterday, but they'll figure out our destination eventually. How long do we have? Marcus checked his watch, with the same precise gesture Tucker remembered from their childhood. The disclosure is scheduled for 8 a.m. Eastern Time tomorrow. If we can protect the prototype and documentation until then, the truth becomes public, and Morrison loses his ability to cover up the conspiracy. And if we can't, Marcus's smile was grim but determined. Then we make sure the prototype is destroyed rather than falling into their hands. I've spent 30 years keeping this technology out of the wrong hands. I won't let them have it now, Tucker nodded, feeling the familiar clarity that came with accepting a difficult mission. After 30 years of questions and grief, he finally had the chance to honor his brother's sacrifice and expose the truth that had cost so many lives. Then we'd better get started, Tucker said. We have a long night ahead of us, and some very determined people trying to stop us. Rex whined softly from his position by the trail, his graying muzzle lifted as if scenting danger on the evening wind. The old dog's instincts had kept Tucker alive through countless challenges, and they were warning him now that the most dangerous part of their journey was just beginning. The cave system where Marcus had hidden his final prototype lay deep in the old-growth forest surrounding Mount Hood, accessible only through trails that hadn't appeared on any map since the 1940s. Tucker followed his brother through the darkness, impressed by Marcus's knowledge of terrain that offered both concealment and defensive advantages. I've been preparing this position for months, Marcus explained, as they approached a natural rock formation that concealed the cave entrance. Multiple escape routes, cached supplies, and communication equipment that can't be jammed or traced. Inside the cave, battery-powered work lights revealed a workshop that represented the culmination of 30 years' worth of secret research. Marcus's final prototype dominated the space, a clean energy generator roughly the size of a large refrigerator, built with the precision of a Swiss timepiece and the robust functionality of industrial machinery. This single unit could power a small town indefinitely, Marcus said, running his hands over the polished metal surfaces with obvious pride. Zero emissions, minimal maintenance requirements, fuel costs measured in pennies rather than dollars. It's everything I dreamed of building when we were kids in Dad's garage. Tucker examined the machine with growing amazement. The engineering was elegant in its simplicity, using principles of steam dynamics and thermal efficiency that seemed almost magical in their effectiveness. This wasn't just an improvement on existing technology, it was a fundamental breakthrough that could transform civilization. But it was the patent application lying on Marcus's workbench that truly told the story. The document, dated just 3 days earlier, listed Marcus Gage as the sole inventor and included detailed specifications that proved the military applications had been unauthorized derivatives of his original peaceful design. Once this patent is filed publicly tomorrow morning, along with the journalist's disclosure, the whole conspiracy collapses, Marcus explained. They can't claim national security classification on technology that's already in the public domain. David worked frantically at his laptop, uploading the final evidence packages to secure servers around the world. The dead man's switches are all in place, he reported. If we don't check in every 12 hours, the information gets released automatically. To back up journalists and scientific organizations, Tucker felt a surge of pride watching his brother and the young man work together with the focused intensity of people who understood they were making history. After decades of hiding and fear, Marcus was finally ready to reclaim his life's work and expose the truth about government corruption. But Rex's sudden growling from the cave entrance warned them that their time was running out. Tucker moved to the shadows near the opening and listened carefully to the forest sounds. Vehicle engines in the distance growing closer. Radio chatter carried on the night wind. Professional voices coordinating a search pattern. They found us, Tucker announced quietly. Multiple vehicles, at least 6 operatives based on the radio traffic. They'll surround the area and wait for daylight to move in. Marcus continued working on his prototype, making final adjustments with steady hands despite the approaching danger. How long do we have? Maybe an hour before they establish a complete perimeter. After that, we're trapped until they decide to come in after us. David looked up from his laptop with barely controlled panic. Can't we just run? Take the prototype and find another hiding place. Tucker shook his head, drawing on tactical experience gained in hostile territory. The machine's too heavy to move quickly, and they've got vehicles to cut off our escape routes. We're better off defending this position until the disclosure deadline. But even as he spoke, Tucker knew their situation was deteriorating rapidly. Morrison's agents had superior numbers, better equipment, and the authority to call in additional resources if needed. The cave offered temporary protection, but it could also become a tomb if they couldn't break out before being completely surrounded. There might be another option, Marcus said, his voice carrying a note of grim determination. The prototype has a self-destruct mechanism built into the core assembly. If it looks like they're going to capture it, I can trigger a controlled overload that will destroy the machine completely, and us along with it. The explosion would be contained to the generator itself, but the cave system would probably collapse. We'd have maybe 30 seconds to reach the back exit tunnel. Tucker studied his brother's face, seeing the same stubborn courage that had driven Marcus to risk everything for his principles 30 years earlier. Is there any way to save both the prototype and the evidence? Not if Morrison's people get their hands on either one. They'll classify the technology immediately and disappear anyone who knows about it. The only way to honor 30 years of work is to make sure the truth survives, even if the machine doesn't. Radio chatter from outside grew louder and more organized. Multiple teams were moving into position, establishing a cordon that would soon make escape impossible. Tucker checked his weapons and ammunition, calculating odds that grew worse with each passing minute. How long until the disclosure deadline? He asked. David checked his laptop clock. 6 hours and 27 minutes until the Washington Post publishes the story. Tucker nodded, accepting the mathematics of their situation. 6 hours was an eternity in tactical terms, but it might as well have been 6 days, given their current position. Morrison's agents wouldn't wait for dawn. They'd move as soon as they were confident no one could escape. Then we hold this position until the story breaks, Tucker decided. Whatever it takes, we make sure Marcus's evidence reaches the public. The final battle for truth was about to begin. The assault began at 3:30 in the morning, with the distinctive whine of tactical drones overhead. Tucker pressed himself against the cave wall, listening to the electronic surveillance devices mapping the terrain and searching for alternate entrances. Morrison's team was thorough, professional, and clearly prepared for extended operations. Movement on the main trail, Tucker reported, watching infrared signatures through the scope of his hunting rifle. 4 operatives advancing in tactical formation. Marcus continued working at his laptop, uploading final backup files to servers around the world while monitoring news feeds for any sign that their story had broken early. The prototype hummed quietly in the background, its clean energy output powering their equipment while serving as a constant reminder of what they were fighting to protect. Rex lay near the cave entrance, his graying muzzle resting on his paws, but his ears alert to every sound from the forest. The old dog had been Tucker's companion through 15 years of mountain solitude, and his presence provided comfort even in the face of overwhelming odds. Agent Morrison's voice echoed from a portable speaker outside the cave, amplified to carry clearly through the rock walls. "Mr. Gage, this is your final opportunity to surrender peacefully. We have authorization to use whatever force is necessary to secure the classified materials in your possession." Tucker moved to a position where his voice would carry, but his location remained concealed. "The only classified materials here are the ones you stole from my brother 30 years ago. Everything else is going public in 3 hours, whether you like it or not. Your brother was a traitor who compromised national security for personal ideology. The technology he developed belongs to the American people, not to environmental extremists and foreign interests. The American people are about to learn the truth about how their government steals from its own citizens." Morrison's response was immediate and violent. Tear gas canisters arced through the cave entrance, followed by flashbang grenades designed to disorient and incapacitate. Tucker had anticipated the assault, pulling on military surplus gas masks and protective gear salvaged from his storage locker. But the attack had an unexpected consequence. Rex, startled by the explosions and blinded by chemical irritants, bolted toward the cave entrance where Morrison's operatives were preparing to advance. Tucker heard his faithful companion's agonized yelp as automatic weapons fire cut down the old dog who'd been trying to protect his master. "Rex!" Tucker's anguish transformed into cold fury as he watched his loyal friend collapse near the cave mouth. The dog's collar tag, bearing Tucker's name and contact information, caught the light from muzzle flashes as Rex struggled to crawl back toward safety. Tucker's military training took over, channeling grief into tactical precision. He returned fire with controlled bursts, forcing Morrison's team to take cover while Marcus activated the prototype's emergency protocols. The machine began cycling through its shutdown sequence, preparing for either evacuation or destruction, depending on how the battle unfolded. "David, how much time do we need to complete the uploads?" Tucker called over the gunfire. 27 minutes for the final evidence package," David replied, his voice steady despite the chaos surrounding them. "But the dead man's switches are already active. If we don't survive this, the information still gets released automatically." A new sound joined the cacophony of battle, helicopters approaching from multiple directions. Morrison had called in additional resources, probably including federal tactical teams with authorization to use lethal force. Their small cave position would be overrun within minutes, unless something changed dramatically. Marcus made the decision Tucker had been dreading. "I'm activating the self-destruct sequence. The prototype will overload in 2 minutes, giving us time to reach the back exit before the cave system collapses." "Wait," Tucker said, studying the tactical situation with desperate intensity. "There might be another way." He'd noticed something during the initial assault. Morrison's operatives were using standard military equipment and tactics, but they were also being extremely careful about evidence preservation. They wanted the prototype intact, along with anyone who could testify about the conspiracy. A complete cave collapse would destroy both the machine and the witnesses. "David, can you trigger the uploads remotely once we're clear of the cave?" "Already set up for remote activation. I just need cellular coverage or Wi-Fi connectivity." Tucker felt the pieces of a desperate plan clicking into place. "Marcus, how long can you delay the self-destruct?" "Maybe 5 minutes, but then the overload becomes irreversible." "That's enough time." Tucker moved toward Rex's still form near the cave entrance, grief and determination warring in his chest. "We're going to run for the back exit, but not to escape. We're going to circle around and hit them from behind while they're focused on the cave." Marcus stared at his brother as if he'd lost his mind. "Tucker, there are at least 8 of them, probably more with the helicopter support. But they think we're trapped. They won't expect an assault from their rear position. Tucker knelt beside Rex and gently closed the old dog's eyes, feeling the weight of another sacrifice demanded by his quest for justice. The collar tag was warm from the dog's body heat, a final connection to 15 years of loyal companionship. "I'm sorry, old friend," Tucker whispered, "but your sacrifice is going to mean something." The self-destruct sequence continued its inexorable countdown as Tucker prepared for the most dangerous gamble of his life. 6 months later, Tucker Gage stood in the workshop behind his Montana cabin, putting the finishing touches on a rocking chair crafted from local oak. The commission had come from Sarah Brennan's daughter-in-law, who'd heard about Tucker's woodworking skills through the small network of people who appreciated handmade furniture. The chair was beautiful work, smooth, functional, built to last generations. Tucker had poured his grief and healing into every joint and curve, finding peace in the rhythm of creation after months of destruction and revelation. The work reminded him that some things endured beyond conspiracy and corruption, that human hands could still build rather than merely tear down. Marcus emerged from the guest cabin Tucker had constructed during the winter months, carrying 2 cups of coffee and moving with the careful gait of someone still recovering from injuries sustained during their escape from the Mount Hood caves. The explosion had collapsed the cave system as planned, destroying the prototype but providing cover for their flanking attack on Morrison's forces. The Washington Post called again, Marcus said. Settling into the chair Tucker kept on the cabin's front porch. "They want to do a follow-up interview about the congressional hearings." Tucker accepted the coffee gratefully, savoring the quiet morning ritual they'd established since Marcus had come home. After 30 years of separation, they were learning to be brothers again, rebuilding relationship patterns that had been interrupted by conspiracy and fear. "What did you tell them?" "Same thing I always tell reporters. The evidence speaks for itself. We don't need to add commentary. The evidence had indeed spoken with devastating clarity. David's uploads had triggered the largest technology scandal in American history, exposing decades of systematic theft and corruption that reached into the highest levels of government and defense contracting. Senator Morrison had resigned in disgrace before being indicted on multiple felony charges. Colonel Brennan faced court-martial proceedings. 3 major defense contractors were fighting civil and criminal lawsuits that would likely bankrupt them, but the most satisfying outcome had been the vindication of Marcus's original vision. Clean energy researchers around the world had seized on his published specifications, rapidly developing commercial applications that promised to revolutionize transportation and power generation. The technology that had been perverted into weapon systems was finally fulfilling its peaceful potential. Elena Vasquez had lived to see justice done, her early dementia proving reversible once she received proper medical care away from the stress and isolation of her exile. She testified before Congress with clarity and passion, describing the intimidation and coercion that had driven her from her career. Her grandson David had become something of a celebrity in whistleblower circles, using his technical skills to help other victims of government overreach. "Any word from David?" Tucker asked. "He's starting his new job with the Environmental Protection Agency next week. Apparently, the current administration is very interested in having people with experience exposing corporate malfeasance." Tucker smiled, remembering the young man's determination to see justice done. David had proven himself during those dangerous days in Oregon, showing courage and integrity that would serve him well in his new role, protecting the public interest. A pickup truck turned into Tucker's driveway, carrying Sarah Brennan and a passenger Tucker didn't immediately recognize. As they approached the cabin, Tucker realized the passenger was Dr. Sarah Martinez, the investigative journalist who'd been instrumental in breaking the story of Marcus's stolen research. "Hope you don't mind unexpected visitors," Sarah Brennan called as she climbed the porch steps. Dr. Martinez wanted to meet the infamous Gage brothers in person. Sarah Martinez was a compact woman in her 40s, with the intense energy of someone accustomed to chasing difficult stories. She shook hands with both brothers, her grip firm and her eyes bright with professional curiosity. "I wanted to thank you personally for trusting me with your evidence," she said. "In 20 years of investigative journalism, I've never worked on a story with such clear moral lines. You handed me proof of government corruption that was absolutely irrefutable." "We handed you proof of theft and murder," Marcus corrected gently. "The moral lines were drawn by the people who perverted peaceful technology into weapons systems." Dr. Martinez nodded, pulling a manila envelope from her briefcase. "Which brings me to why I'm here. The Pentagon has been quietly approaching clean energy researchers, offering lucrative contracts for dual-use technology development. I think they're trying to legitimately acquire what they previously stole." Tucker examined the documents. Martinez had brought contract proposals and correspondence that suggested the military-industrial complex was adapting to new realities rather than abandoning old practices. "Some fights never really end," Tucker observed. "They just change tactics, which is why I'm starting a foundation to support independent researchers," Marcus announced. "Clean Energy Defense Fund, legal protection and financial support for scientists who want to keep their work in civilian hands." It was exactly the kind of initiative Tucker had expected from his brother. Marcus had never been content with simply exposing problems. He wanted to build solutions that would prevent future corruption. The foundation would be funded by lawsuit settlements from the defense contractors, turning their ill-gotten profits into protection for the next generation of inventors. As their visitors prepared to leave, Dr. Martinez handed Tucker a handwritten letter addressed in familiar script. "This came to my office yesterday, forwarded through several intermediaries. I think it's from someone who wants to remain anonymous, but appreciates what you've accomplished." Tucker opened the letter carefully, recognizing Elena Vasquez's careful penmanship despite the tremor of age. "Dear Tucker and Marcus, I wanted you to know that your courage has inspired other victims to come forward. 3 more researchers have contacted congressional investigators about technology theft and intimidation. The foundation you're creating may prevent future scientists from suffering what we endured. Marcus, your father would be proud of the man you've become. You never compromised your principles, even when it cost you everything. Tucker, your loyalty and determination brought justice to people who thought they'd never see it. Thank you for giving an old woman the chance to see truth triumph over corruption. With love and gratitude, Elena." Tucker folded the letter carefully and placed it in his shirt pocket, next to the brass compass Marcus had given him so many years ago. The compass had guided him through hostile territory, mountain solitude, and finally to the truth about his brother's fate. Now it would guide him through whatever challenges lay ahead. That evening, Tucker and Marcus sat on the cabin porch, watching the sunset behind the Montana peaks. The silence between them was comfortable now, filled with the peace that comes from questions answered and family bonds restored. "Any regrets?" Tucker asked. Marcus considered the question seriously. "About the 30 years we lost?" "Yes, about fighting for principles that matter." "Never." Tucker nodded, scratching behind the ears of the young border collie puppy he'd adopted from the local animal shelter. The dog, named Scout in honor of Rex's memory, represented hope and new beginnings, proof that life continued beyond loss and sacrifice. The truth had set them free, but freedom came with responsibility. They would continue fighting for clean energy, for honest science, for a world where innovation served humanity rather than destroying it. Some battles were worth a lifetime of commitment. As darkness settled over the mountains, Tucker felt the weight of his brother's hand on his shoulder, a connection that had survived 30 years of separation and would endure whatever challenges the future might bring. They were home, they were together, and the truth would always be stronger than any conspiracy built on lies.